Life is not a chessboard where each player starts with the same number of pawns. Life is unfair, and don't let anyone convince you otherwise. People have unfair advantages, and so do you. Our job is to find them and develop them, or, in other words, play the cards that life dealt us to the maximum of our abilities. C.S. Lewis said, "You're never too old to set another goal or to dream a new dream." How many times have you thought to yourself, if only I had started that thing 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I now would have 10 years of experience, or I thought that I would have achieved by now a lot more. Apparently, everyone seems to have life figured out, except for us. We open our social media and we see people jumping from one plane to the other, from one holiday destination to the other, loads of money and all that stuff, except for us, of course. This is a very common emotion that people get. But this feeling needs to get addressed, because if we don't address it, although now we may only have the feeling of being stuck, while in reality we're not stuck, if we don't address it, eventually it will be the one parameter that will affect our life, and eventually we will be stuck. But I don't think that all of us experience the same feeling to the same degree. I think that conscientiousness has something to do about it. And when I say about conscientiousness, I mean about Carl Jung's Big Five personality traits, conscientiousness being one of them. Of course, to make it simple, people who are high in conscientiousness are ambitious, competitive, future-oriented people, okay? And I think that people who are high in conscientiousness are the ones who experience this feeling more. But let's check how this feeling can affect our life. Well, it can affect our lives in two major ways. The first one being that if we are constantly stressed, then it will affect all our interpersonal relationships. Imagine if you were with a group of friends and you're constantly stressed out. Slowly, you will notice that people start cutting you out of their companies. People stop inviting you to parties or to go out for a coffee, etc., etc. And it's not only that, but if you are the person who constantly whines about how that person is amazing and that person is amazing and you are not amazing, in other words, they have something you don't and you're whining all the time, then it becomes exhausting after a point. We become what is known as energy vampires, right? We all know those people. They go into a group, and after you're done having a coffee for them for like 1 or 2 hours, you're feeling so drained, like they have sucked all the energy from you. You don't want to be that energy vampire, because everybody will start isolating you and cutting you out from their life eventually. Sometimes this feeling also results in us isolating ourselves from the rest of the group. And the reason is because we feel unworthy to be in their company. In other words, we are slowly cutting off our network. And you know very well that our network is our net worth, as Porter Gale said. Now, let's check the second way in which this feeling can affect our lives. We end up materializing what we believe in our heads. In other words, we will fulfill a self-fulfilling prophecy. What does that mean? Check the following logic. I think that I am left behind, okay, compared to a person. I see that the gap is so huge that I cannot bridge it. In other words, I cannot get close to that person. I feel that since I am already that far behind, I may as well not even try to close the gap. And what ends up happening is, just because I didn't put in the effort, I am left behind. Now that we have seen how this feeling can affect our lives, let's check what causes it. And the first thing, of course, the known suspect, the social media. We open our social media and we see all the people living their life while we're not. We listen on the news or the social media about the latest self-made millionaire who started from poors and riches from their mother's basement, and you're like, I don't even have a basement. And that, of course, exacerbates the feeling even more. And we fail to understand that people on social media are showing us exactly what they want to show us. They show to us a slice, a hyper-idealized slice of their life made up of the highlights of their day. One of our mental biases kicks in at that point and thinks that just because I see people all the time living highlights, that's how their life, the rest of their life should be. We think that all their lives are made up of highlights, when we know that this is not the case. We know that everyone, including the influencer, has at some point to go and do average, everyday, boring stuff. Which of course reminds me about Richard Branson. Do you remember who Richard Branson is? Self-made multi-millionaire in everybody's mind. That guy is the fun, playful guy, even at the age of 70, 80, I don't know how old he is now, with the soul of a 20-year-old, jumping from one fun adventure and activity to the next one, right? And we think that Richard Branson's life is exactly like this all the time. But keep in mind that this guy is a multi-millionaire, owner of many, many companies, and at some point, he has to sit down to his desk and sign documents, that boring task of signing documents. But of course, social media never saw Branson actually sign documents, right? They show you only the highlights. Enter the second mental bias. Do you know who we don't see on social media? The people who failed. And since we see only winners on social media, we assume that everybody is a winner, except for us, of course. But I'm telling you, for every one winner that we see on social media, there are like 20 or 100 people who failed to reach that goal. So don't think you're the only one not making it in life. This is called the survivor spotlight. And the last thing that we should keep in mind is that social media, people show us what they want us to see. And yes, I am, of course, referring to those 20-year-olds sitting on a Lamborghini in front of a mansion, counting cash for some reason. Like, who uses cash? Nobody uses cash anyway nowadays. And why do they sit on that Lamborghini? It's disrespectful to the car. And I'm not a car guy myself. But of course, they have to show us that they are very rich and very successful. And they are coincidentally very willing to share their secrets with us if we only buy their latest crypto trading course, which is available for $9.99, right? So not everything on social media is as it seems. At this point, I think that we should address some misconceptions, the most common ones that people have, and what is the right way of thinking about them. The first misconception is that if we miss the train, if we fail to start that thing on that exact time that we need to start, then there is no other time that we can catch that train. False belief number 2. We think that progress is done in a straight, linear way when it doesn't. What I have noticed is that sometimes we move backwards, unfortunately. Okay, sometimes we make mistakes that take us back, but that's the whole process of making a mistake. That mistake will cost us probably. We will fix, we will learn from our mistakes, move on. Sometimes we are trying to connect dots and we embark on journeys and activities that seem completely unrelated, but it is like 10 or 20 years later down the line when we start to connect dots that seem to be unconnected up to that point to finally reach success. If you remember Steve Jobs attended a calligraphy course at some point at his college when he was 18 or 19 years old, which was completely unrelated to the major he was studying. Many years later, that calligraphy course was the inspiration and the reason that the new Macs that was designed that year, the first Mac if I'm not mistaken, contained a beautiful calligraphic font. And it was that calligraphic font that gave Steve Jobs and Apple at that point the competitive advantage to reach success. If it wasn't for that dot, what's called that calligraphy course, back at his college, which seemed completely unrelated to anything he was doing, the iMacs would not be the same. What I'm trying to say is that you may be progressing, you may not be seeing results, you will see results cumulative, which means altogether at one point 10 or 15 years later. That may be the case, you never know. Okay, false belief number 3, and one of the harshest lessons in this video. Life is not a chessboard where everybody starts at the start of the game with the same pawns or, in real life scenario, with the same resources. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. People have unfair advantages, and so do you. And the only thing that you can do is to find what those unfair advantages are, use them and develop them to your advantage, and try to reach success. Success is not guaranteed. The struggle is guaranteed. Success is not guaranteed. But what else can we do other than play the cards that life dealt us to the maximum of our abilities? I mean, at the end of our lives, hopefully at 80, 90 years old, we can look back and say, yeah, you know what? I may not have become a multi-millionaire or billionaire, however someone defines success, but at least I did my best, I developed my skills and what was given to me to the maximum of my abilities, and I'm damn proud about it. Let me tell you a real story about how unfair life is at this point, because you're going to find it very insightful. So I have a friend. This is a real story. Let's call my friend John, okay? So John and his brother had a startup. They were working, both brothers were working full-time jobs. And during the time they had left in the afternoons and the weekends, they were running this startup. So John had this mentor. Mentor, for those who don't know what mentors are in startup, are people who are highly more experienced, way far ahead in their journey than you, and who offer their counsel and advice on how to run your startup and how to scale and stuff like that. So that lady, the mentor was a lady around 60 years old. They meet with my friend John at their monthly catch up, and she asked him, John, what's the problem? Why is not the startup going? Why are you not progressing? And my friend John, coming from Greece, that's where originally I am in, who has been in a recession since 2009, and we can barely have any savings, said, I don't have any money. There's no cash. I got to pay the accountant 400 euros next month that I own him for 3 months now, and we can't find the money. And then the mentor turns around and says the following: seriously, you can't find the money? My son, when he was starting his startup 10 years ago, he approached 3 of his friends. He asked them to give him 100,000 euros. And of course, his friends were never expecting to get those 100,000 euros back. And so those 3 friends gave him 100,000 euros and he did his startup. John, do you really want to tell me that you cannot find a couple of friends who can give you 100,000 euros just like that? And my friend was left speechless. My friend said later that night to me, it was at this moment that I realized there are people who are living in our society just right next to us who are completely disregarding what life looks for the average person. Why I'm saying you this story? I'm saying this story because wouldn't it be unfair to compare my friend John and the level of success he would have with his startup, I hope it goes well, by the way, to the son of this mentor who had 300,000 euros, who had his mother being in business and knowing and having an entire network, his mother networks about legals, about accounting, about how to run a startup. Wouldn't it be unfair to compare my friend John with that person? So as I say, life is unfair. Not everyone starts at zero. So some practical tips to help us manage better and lessen that feeling. Practical tip number 1, redefine what success looks like for us. What are those metrics for you, your personal metrics, that if you hit, if you achieve, you will say, yes, now I am successful? Because most of the times, and if you think right now, pretty much 99% of people would have said, I want $1 million in the bank, or I want a very expensive car, or a very expensive house. No one seems to be putting value in more intangible things that are very, very valuable, like friendship, for example, or family. Does it matter if you have all the money in the world, but you have no friends and no family? So sit down and write down and make specific what success looks like for you. You may be surprised by the results. And of course, you will hear me talk a lot about taking a piece of paper and a pen and sit down and write. I cannot stress how journaling has changed my life. There is no difference between thinking and writing, because what writing is actually thinking, and you are forcing yourself to make specific, vague concepts that have been swirling around in your mind, driving you crazy. So the moment you are forced to take the pen and paper and actually write down, you're forcing yourself to make them specific. And the moment you articulate them, that moment exactly, you have made them specific and you have power over them. So make specific what success looks like for you. The second thing that we can do to lessen that feeling behind is comparing ourselves to others. And if you're expecting me to say, don't compare yourself to others, because that is a bit of cliche, that's not what I'm going to say at all. I believe there's a silver line between comparing yourself to others and not comparing yourself to them at all. Comparison as a mechanism has survived through evolution for hundreds of thousands of years. It's still inside humans for some reason. So if it is there, then it means that it gives us an evolutionary advantage. Why is it there? I believe that it is the violation of that mechanism that causes us to feel as bad as we feel when we're feeling behind. I assume, and it's only of course my assumption, that the reason the comparison mechanism exists is that if we would see something that is beneficial for somebody else, we would go to imitate this, and by imitating this, we would also reap the benefits, thus making our society a lot more advanced and improved. But I spoke earlier about the violation of this mechanism, and of course, let's address the violation of this comparison mechanism below and why we feel always behind. Keep in mind that 1, not everything is as it seems. 2, life is unfair and people have unfair advantages. And 3, the life circumstances of every one of us have been different. Don't judge unequal things. The third thing we can do to lessen this feeling is to extend the time horizon. And what I mean by this is by what age we should have achieved success. Why do we consider that we must reach success by age 20 or 30 or 40? Who sets those metrics? Life is seen many, many times as a race. And don't get me wrong, many, many times life is a race. Okay, it's a competition. Who can get there to the goal fastest? But at the same time, at a concept like general life success, which is made up by so many factors, like do you have family, do you have friends, what's your work-life balance, or how much money do you have, are you financially free, and all those things. It's not a one size fits all. It's not like if you don't achieve this by 20 or 30 or 40, you are failed. And life is changing so much nowadays and so fast. The rate to which life changes has accelerated so much, and it's going to accelerate even more with the coming of artificial intelligence, that perhaps we need to readjust the time frame until we can reach success. At the same time, I will just mention two statistics, okay? The first one is that the first time that someone becomes a millionaire through a company is late 40s to early 50s, okay? Because we think that everyone should be rich by age 30 or something. And the second thing is that the average person will have 5 to 7 career changes throughout his life until he reaches, or he or she reaches, retirement. So what I want you to keep from this, extend the time horizon and define what success looks like for you. Okay, so I think this video is dragging a bit too long, so let me give you a couple more tips, but this will be of course the subject for another video. Like, okay, I know if I'm stuck or if I'm not stuck. I have seen the misconceptions. Now, what do I do? Well, I'm going to tell you the logic, and the logic is not going to be groundbreaking, but the way that we should apply this is going to be groundbreaking and different. Then the logic is the following. You need to assess where you currently are in life. You need to assess where you want to go, and you need to make a plan to bridge those two. And of course, I will make another video on this, because assessing where exactly we stand is very, very difficult. We cannot do this only on ourselves. Discovering where we want to go is a whole different subject, because everybody feels lost and no one has any idea where they're going, and don't let them tell you otherwise. But the advice that I will give you very, very briefly on this is have a personality test, map your interests, and be directionally correct, not absolutely correct. It means I think that thing I like, I'm going to follow that thing. Follow that kind of logic. As Alex Haramosi says, be directionally correct, not absolutely correct. And the third thing that I want to remind you is we can always iterate and change and adapt the plan as we move along. We become wiser, we make mistakes, we learn, and we acquire more information when we are in the journey. Okay, not from looking at it from outside, which we are right now as we are planning the journey. I hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned.